Hi, thanks again for joining me on another episode of Sealed for Good. Today we're going to be talking about box gutters, and this one gets overlooked a lot because while we're all out there thinking about balconies and roofs and bathrooms, retaining walls, etc., box gutters comes up quite a lot, particularly this time of year in the winter months, because on a lot of commercial buildings and a lot of aged buildings particularly, you start to see where these break down, and when they leak they can create a lot of chaos because more often than not they're a commercial building. There's plant and equipment below them. It's not always a housing situation, and that can really impact tenants, landlords, etc., and it can damage plant and equipment. I've seen that firsthand where some electrical equipment can get damaged virtually within hours because of a leak that's sprung from a box gutter. And so there's a couple things to look at when you are dealing with box gutter repairs. If you're a contractor and you're going up there, firstly make sure that the box gutter has correct falls, because if it doesn't fall properly and the water just sits and ponds there, you've got an issue because you're going to be waterproofing it and you're actually making it worse where water just sits on there. You want to make sure that that is signed off on by your client, that they've acknowledged that, because the definition of ponding water is that after 48 to 72 hours that water should dissipate. If it's constantly staying there, then it's not ponding water, you've actually created a pond. So that is one to look out for. But then you've got to ensure that you look at this. So most box gutters are a metal surface, and that metal can create a bit of confusion on how we approach it, because I see a lot of guys look at the metal, they price in to just use a steel wire brush to remove the surface rust if that's there, and what happens is that it might be beyond just surface rust. So you've got to ensure that once you've determined if there's more than just surface rust, you allow for a rust converter in your price and your application. And you've got to get a rust converter that is not oil-based, that when it dries it allows a water-based system to bond on top of it. So take note of that one. The next piece of that is that you ensure, many times when I see these box gutters, everyone's had a go at it. They've either painted a bit of bitumen on there or they've put silicone all over the place on the nail holes to screws to sort of save the day, and it hasn't worked. You're going to need to remove a lot of those residues, particularly the silicone, because that will impact what you can bond to it. And also a lot of those heads that are on the box gutter can actually create issues where water just sits around them. So take note of all the little details as normal, because that's where the devil is, in that detail. Take note of that one. So once you've like everything, you've cleaned it, you've got it right, surface preparation, you've done the rust converter if it needs to be rust converted. The product in our range is the Gripset OP, and you apply the Gripset OP in 2 coats because it's going on metal. It bonds really well, it dries well. Ensure you get that surface water off of it. You can't bond it while there's surface water there. And then once that's dried, you then start your application with the Gripset P39, our UV polyurethane system, and ensure where you've got your junctions of the box gutter, because there are lap joints, you take note that if they haven't been reinforced properly, first they need to be reinforced, but then reinforce them with our Gripset RF fabric at that joint. Now, what is better than going with the RF fabric is to actually use the butyl tape. The butyl tape is where you could go back to the scratch after you've cleaned it and the surface prepared it, and instead of using things like the OP primer first, go and do all the detailing with the butyl, because the butyl is instantly waterproof, it's vibration resistant, and it actually will bond directly to metal really well without having to prime. As long as it's cleaned, you can go straight to the metal surface. You can cut it in sections to go over little nail heads, screw heads, all the joints, and sometimes we even see it detailed at the wall floor junctions. And then what's good about that is then when you have to prime, you don't have to prime over the butyl, and the P39 goes directly over the primer itself and the butyl tape facing itself as well, which is the same facing as our Gripset RF fabric. So it's all compatible. And then when you've completed that job, you might see the outline of the tapes where they are, but you should not see the facing of the tape. So ensure you've got a nice liberal coating over the top of that with the P39. Let that dry, and that can handle the weather and add more life to those box gutters. Now, there's 2 other box gutters quickly I'm going to bring up that you need to be aware of that are not as common, but they do come up. Concrete box gutters. We do see them from time to time. The only difference there is once you've cleaned it, you use the Gripset E60 as the primer, then the P39. And if there's any hairline cracks, obviously the butyl tape will work well with that as well. The other one is sometimes you'll see asbestos gutters. Now, asbestos gutters, you need to be in a state that allows you to coat over them. Check the requirements, because state by state the requirements differ, and you might actually be breaking the law by coating over asbestos. If you are in a state that allows you to do that, you need to follow the instructions from the EPA on how you clean and prepare any asbestos surface, because you've got to actually control the wash off and the clean. You might need to engage an asbestos specialist to help you in that situation. But once you've got to the actual application stage, Gripset GP Primer in 2 coats works really well on asbestos because it penetrates, it locks the fibres, and then you put the P39 on. If you're working on asbestos, guys, be very, very careful. You need to know exactly what you're doing, find out the regulations if you need a permit and how they're cleaned. But they do come up, and so your client might ask you to go and seal an asbestos box cutter, and if you can't do it, you need to let them know that they need to replace it. Do that, win the next job, don't get caught in something that's going to come back to bite you on the backside. Any questions on box cutters, throw them our way. We've got lots of experience in this area, we can help you. I have seen another box cutter once, just recall that, in New Zealand with timber, but we don't do that in Australia, so luckily for New Zealand, the Kiwis don't mind a bit of timber in their box cutters with plywood. But the metal surfaces, asbestos and concrete, if you've got any questions coming our way, throw them over and we can help you there. Until next time, we'll see you in an episode of Seal for Good.